Andrew. And thank you all for coming. Um, Container gardening, I'll just, before I switch to my PowerPoint, I'll give a little kind of background experience. I've grown things I've loved plants my whole life, even as a kid. And from living in apartments and moving around, it was always containers was the best way to do it. It's like they go with me wherever I go. And they can be from anywhere from little pots on a windowsill to lots on the porch to a whole yard full of containers. Um, I've always loved growing plants in containers for lots of reasons, but now I do it for a living. Since about 1995, I've been managing a big nursery on the west side of Phoenix. And I also have a smaller nursery of my own and lots of my own little pet plants, even more than ever these days. So I've gotten some experience over the years with mainly what types of pots work best, what type of material they're made out of and what size they are for a certain type of plant, and what types of soil mixes. Over the years, especially at the nursery that I work at, we've tried all kinds of ingredients for potting mixes. We mix our own potting mix, and some are cheap but they don't work very well, and some are real expensive but work about the same as ones that aren't quite so expensive. So just constantly different mixtures and different ingredients and different fertilizers and different plants that go in that. So I'm hoping to share that experience with everyone here today, and just do a little bit of fun, because we're gonna do a demonstration of planting some stuff up here if I can, the best I can with a computer. And that's probably it. I'll start with the PowerPoint, but there's some pictures and demonstrations, and I'll be going through that handout that you should have gotten, which you can also look at home. The thing you might use it for home, there's some like in how to mix your own potting soil, like ingredients and percentages and things like that you might reference later on, even after the class, but the rest is kind of just to keep me on track here. So I'm going to switch to share screen in my PowerPoint. And this is the cover slide with my email, probably most importantly on this slide. Never be afraid to email me pictures or questions. I'll always get back to you as soon as I can with answers, or it's just nice to see people's stuff sometimes, what they got going on, especially in containers. Let's see here. There's, sorry, technical difficulties here. Okay, so these are just some pictures that I wanted to start with of some containers that I've made or bought over the years. This thing's only about 10 inches tall. It was just a little statue head, Buddha head at Ross, and it was made out of plastic, which I always check because I had to cut the top off. It had like a hair part on top that I cut off with a saw, and like wood saws work on plastic too, so it's pretty easy to do. I drilled holes in the bottom, which as I go through this course you'll know that I think every plant grown in a pot should have holes in the bottom, never without. So I drilled holes in the bottom, filled it up with good cactus mix for this particular aloe, and planted it in there. And it's actually 4 times that big now, like spilling over the edges, and I get 15-20 flower spikes coming out of it when it blooms. But it was, I don't know, $6.99 or something like that, real cheap and easy to work with because it was plastic. There's like porcelain is very hard to work with. To cut or even drill is very hard to work with, like so is stoneware. But plastic's easy, metal's easy, and wood's easy. So anything you find out of those materials, softer clay is even easy to drill holes in the bottom. So here's another one. This one, you can't tell by the picture, is only, it was an Amazon purchase that seemed like it was going to be much bigger, but it works perfectly for this little tiny cactus. The cactus doesn't grow very fast in it, but that's what I want. I want it to just kind of stay like that. It's beautiful the way it is, I think. And I water it only as it starts to show a little bit of sign of drought, like shrivels up a little bit, turns a little bit of reddish color when it's really dry, and then I water it by putting it in a bowl of water. I set the whole thing in a bowl of water for about an hour, and it soaks it up, and then I put it back on a little shelf where it goes and stays the same. I'm not gonna say forever, but for a long time. And if you want something like that, that's just kind of a nice decoration and get some plant life in the house, or a bright windowsill, things like that work. It did have a hole in the bottom already when I bought it, and the top was cut off when it came. And so this is a purchase at an antique store, antique beer cans. They're easy to, you can use a can opener to cut the top off. So you just cut the top off to make an opening, poke holes in the bottom. And it was an interesting kind of conversation starter. And that's a house plant, a very low light house plant, so it could go in any room of the house after it was planted, and conversation starter, whatever. But it was interesting. It was a real antique beer can. I've used lots of kind of old cans like that, even soup cans. But the thing about metal cans is the being wet all the time, they don't last a whole long time, maybe a year, 2 years before they kind of rust away enough where it's hard to read what's on them anymore. But it was definitely a good purchase and lasted me quite a while. So this is a regular glazed pot. So, I mean, to buy something like this now, a lot of times they're $50, $60, but that palm has been in that pot for a good 15 years. So it's a type of sago palm. It's very slow growing. It doesn't really make trunks. It just makes those kind of ball shaped trunks at the base, but it doesn't get big. So it's able to stay in that pot for indefinitely. And so I bought an expensive pot that's glazed on the inside and out. And those kind of pots made out of good dense clay with a glaze all around inside and out is probably the longest lasting pot you can get. So if you have a prize plant that doesn't grow real fast and you just want it to last a really long time in its pot, definitely put up the money for a more expensive glazed pot like that. This is a metal pool filter container. Yeah, like it was the old brass that you put a pool filter in. They had openings for pipes in the one side and the other side, and a couple holes that had rusted out through the bottom. And so it worked great to put these different succulents in. Succulents don't need, we're gonna talk a lot about this, but succulents don't need a whole lot of root space. So all that plant is hanging out of that little tiny brass pot. And so it worked out to be a pretty good hanging basket. You know, I put wire on there was places where screws used to go through that I could put wire, just baling wire, and tied it up into like a hanger. And so that worked out pretty good to be, I like the recycled industrial, material. To me, it's just interesting, something that used to be mechanical or human made has now kind of went back to nature or whatever, turned back into something natural. So a lot of people like that fashion too, and they're definitely cheap when you find things like that. This was another Ross purchase, and that was like planted the same day I took the picture. So if you want an instant little pot, just succulents again, because it's a pretty small pot, things like that. This is a glazed pot. That cactus has been in it for at least 10 years, and it fit just perfect in the crotch of that tree. And I knew this kind of cactus has those arms like an octopus that kind of hug around the branch. So I like that one too. That ended up being like a interesting thing to look at out there in the yard, and that tree holds it up still. So again, that's a lot of cactus coming out of a pretty small pot, which is possible because it's a succulent. And there's some soup cans, old soup cans, which, like I say, they're already rusty. And it's a year or 2 years before they kind of fall apart, but it's interesting. I have seen these painted. I've seen restaurants that use the 1 gallon big coffee containers or in vegetables, whatever, but cans, the big ones, and painted inside and out with like a kind of an outdoor paint. And then you can make them any color you want, and the paint makes them last longer too. So it's another idea. Real cheap source for a pot. Poke holes in the bottom with a pruners or a knife or a drill bit, and paint them or leave them rustic if you like that look. And there's another way to get a real cheap pot, and you're in a way recycling. Reusing is one of the R's of recycling, one of the better ones. So it's a good thing to do. and talk about recycling or reusing, repurposing. This was never a never a favorite of my wife, but to me it's an interesting concept. So there's my old toilet converted into a nice succulent container, and that was it, I think, on those. So the thing I want to talk about now is kind of just some reasons. I mentioned a little bit about mobility for why you'd put things in pots. These are reasons why I like to grow containers in pots. And as a business, we have to, because if we want to grow plants and move them around in the nursery, if you grow a block of plants and you sell half, you want to scrunch up the rest of them and refill it as fast as possible. So you're constantly using the land to its most efficient amount, like always using every inch of land. So that's one thing. But even in your house, you want to move them around. So we'll talk about a few examples, but one real good example is say you have a tomato plant in a big pot, and in the summertime it's going to it burns. They burn full sun. So in the summertime you can put it in some shade, but when it cools off in the fall, you can move it back out into full sun, and because they don't fruit in the shade. So you back and forth, something like that. Or a pepper plant, something, those kind of things that need shade in the summer but sun in the winter. It's mobility again. You can move those pots around, and that's over and over. The mobility of having plants in pots is one of the biggest benefits, I think. But there's others. I like I say, I moved around a lot earlier in life, and I always had all these plants to carry around with me in pots. Well, I finally bought 3 acres in Tullison, and I started putting everything in the ground. Plant this here, plant that there, and right away, like a cactus I put in the ground, the Bermuda grass grows up all over it, and you can't weed whack the Bermuda grass because you'll kill the cactus. You can't spray it. You can't pick it out with your hands because it's pokey. It's like a nightmare. So, I'm digging half these things back up and putting them in pots because it's so much easier to maintain or keep. Gophers, if you have gophers, is another one too, that things go on the ground. Some things gophers just love, like artichokes and fig trees and things like that. So putting things in the ground, sometimes you compete with these other pests. Our soil here in the desert is very alkaline, so the pH is real high. That means, and there's a lot of salt in it. So some plants love that. Desert plants love that. Plants that aren't from a desert somewhere don't love that. So things like Arabian jasmine is one that they grow very well in pots, stay real dark green, bloom a lot. The second you put them in the ground here, if you don't amend the soil, they turn yellow. The leaves all turn yellow, and that's from the pH being different than they're used to from where they're from. It's a forest plant that likes dark, rich, acidic soil, and you throw them in our soil that's all the opposite of that, then they don't grow as well either. So some things, they just grow better. Strawberries, for example, grow wonderfully in a pot. And every time I've tried to put them into the soil, native field soil, without amending the soil, they turn yellow too. The leaves turn yellow. They don't grow as good. So that's another reason, is some things just like pots better. They grow in pots better. The space limitations, not everybody has a yard. Some people, all they have is a windowsill or a little tiny patio on a 10th floor apartment or something, so that's a better place for plants in containers. Weeding, even, like I said about the Bermuda grass, but in general, it's much easier to pull weeds out of potting soil than it is out of the hard ground. So if you have problems with weeds kind of swallowing up whatever you put in the ground, it's much easier to manage that if they're in a pot too. They might sprout in the potting soil, but they're super easy to pull out of that fluffy potting soil, and that makes it much easier to grow in pots. Those are kind of the main ones that I wanted to talk about as far as reasons to grow plants in pots. And so while you're growing plants in pots, we got to talk about the container. The container is kind of where it starts. We saw some examples in the photos of things that can be used as containers, as long as it's got a hole in the bottom. And I absolutely think that all plants that grow in a container should have a hole in the bottom of the container, because it's too hard to manage the water without. What you're trying to do with container, the soil in a container, is get it thoroughly moist, let water run out the bottom. That leaches the salts out of the soil. And then you want it to have a lot of air in the soil and a lot of moisture. and that's the perfect conditions for roots of anything to grow in. Well, when you don't have holes in the bottom, it obviously fills up with water, even if it's just in the bottom, and then there's no air down there. So most plants' roots will suffocate in that environment. The roots of plants need air. So if there is very few plants in the world, there is some that their roots can grow in just water. But even in that case, the water needs to be switched out a lot so it doesn't get stagnant. So the worst case scenario, there are no holes in the bottom. It fills up with water. The soil in the bottom of the pot gets very, very stinky for one. And that smell of ammonia, it's from the potting soil rotting away with no oxygen. And then that's a very toxic environment for roots. So you need that water to run out the bottom. And when you do water, you water the whole thing very thoroughly. And then if it's something that needs more water, you water it again the second it dries out. And if it's something like a cactus or succulent, you let it go as long as it can handle without water. And then when you do the same thing again. So you do need those holes in the bottom of the pot. That's one of the biggest things that the biggest considerations as far as a container. And the next thing is what it's made out of. So the container, a big container holds a lot more soil, which holds a lot more water, and which holds a lot more fertilizer. So that if you have plants that are heavy, that need a lot of fertilizer and a lot of water, and they have a lot of roots, you want them in a big pot. Makes sense. Cactus and succulents is the opposite. They don't need a lot of root space, and they don't need a lot of water, and they don't need a lot of fertilizer. So they can go in a tiny pot. So it's kind of like, depending on what kind of plant it is, the size of the pot matters a lot. You want to crowd in cactus and succulents, you want to make crowded or just a little pot for what it seems like they would need. And then things like tomatoes and peppers and things that are really fast growing and need a lot of water and a lot of root space, those ones you want to put in a big pot. So the size of the pot just depends on what plant you want to grow in it. The next thing I want to talk about is what the pot's made out of, and mainly because some materials like terracotta with no glaze on it sweats water out the sides, and they dry out really, really fast. Wood is like that also, that's porous. So if the material that the pot is made out of is porous, that means the water goes through the sides. It's going to dry out faster, which would be great for cactus and succulents, right? But it's not going to be very good for a tomato that needs water all the time. So plastic or glazed clay or metal, those ones stay wet longer. It's just, that's something you should know when you're picking a pot for the plant that you're going to put in it, whether the material that it's made out of is going to dry out faster or less or slower. So those are the main things about the pot. One thing I want to mention about the pot is has to do with heat. And because one of our most severe conditions we have here in the desert is this extreme heat in the summer, the roots of a plant that's in the ground can hide from that heat a little bit by growing deep in the soil where it stays cool. Up in a pot, it's very exposed to the heat, and so it's a bigger problem in potted plants. Plants that are heat sensitive, maybe a rose or something like that, up in a pot is going to have much more problem dealing with the heat, because all of its roots get hot during the day because they can't go down deep in the ground and hide from that heat. So it's something to think about, something to consider. Putting that pot in the shade helps immensely. So when you put that for the summer, if you move that pot into the shade, it keeps the pot cooler just because the sun's not beating on the side of that container. And one thing I noticed, because all day we're checking roots on plants before to see if they're ready for sale or not, you turn them upside down and pull the pot off and you can see all the roots on there, right? So I do that all the time. One thing I noticed is in the summertime, especially on the west side of the pot, most every plant, the roots die on the surface there, not all the way through the pot, but the roots that are on the surface touching the pot on the west side usually die in the summer. It's okay for most plants because the roots that are in the middle of the potting soil insulates them a little better, and the roots that are on the east side of the pot, they're fine because they get afternoon shade, right? It's the hot afternoon sun that's blasting on the west side of the pot that really burns roots. Most plants handle that fine. Like I say, if you put them in the shade, all the better. But if they stay in the sun, most plants can handle it. But if you go rearranging your porch and spinning all the pots around, it's something to consider. So you want to probably not move, especially heat sensitive plants, around a whole lot in the summer. If their roots are dead on the west side but living on the east side, and you spin that pot the opposite direction, now you've killed all the roots around, all the way around on that pot, just to redecorate, you know. So I don't transplant things that are heat sensitive in the summer. You don't really, I avoid trimming. Don't transplant, don't trim, don't move around until the heat's over, is probably the best trick I could give on that. So just be conscious of the heat is our, you know, biggest problem here, especially for certain plants that aren't used to the heat, non-desert adapted plants, which many of them grow well in a pot. So it might be things that you have. Just be careful with that. So next is potting soil. And I'm going to flip, let's see here. I'm going to stop sharing screen real quick so I can show you some different things here. All right. So as far as soil goes, there's more expensive potting soils and really, really cheap potting soils. And I think you get what you pay for in potting soils. I'm not trying to sell you a certain brand, but I would say that I think you get what you pay for in potting soils. The materials that they're made out of are different. So the cheapest versions of potting soil, and it does have to say potting soil. If you're using soil in a pot and you're buying it, it has to say potting soil on it. You don't want to use mulch, and you don't want to use topsoil. You don't want to use compost that's straight compost. You know, it has to say potting soil if you're going to use it in a pot and you're going to buy it. So the cheapest version of that is like really fresh ground wood bark, usually from like lumber mills where they make wood. It's all the waste and they grind it up. They use that. It's basically sawdust, and they either use sand or perlite to give it some drainage so it drains when the water goes through it. It's the cheapest way to make potting soil. The problem with that is really raw wood material starts to decompose when you get it wet. Well, as it decomposes, it requires fertilizer to decompose. I won't get into all the details of what kinds and all that, but just so you know, it's going to be competing for the plant also needs fertilizer, right? So the plant needs fertilizer, the potting soil needs fertilizer, and if you don't add enough fertilizer for both, the plant will suffer and the soil will win until someday when it's all the way broken down, but by that time the plant would have died. So the cheapest fertilizers need a lot of fertilizer to be added to them for the plant to grow in the same time the soil is decomposing. So these more expensive potting soils have the organic material. That's the part of that's made out of some kind of living thing, wood or peat moss or coconut husk. They use a lot now, those type of things. More expensive potting soils use products that don't break down so fast. Like peat moss is ancient and it's already broken down from long ago. And coconut husk, they call it coir, coconut coir. It is very slow to decompose. It's just made that way. And so it takes forever to decompose, which means it's not using up fertilizer, stealing it from the plant to do its decomposition. And those ingredients are more expensive, which makes it more expensive potting soil, but it saves you from having to add so much fertilizer all the time and manage that at all times, you know, worrying about if you're putting enough on or too much or what. So I would even now, some of the higher end potting soils, the more expensive ones, they not only have better ingredients, more expensive ingredients that last longer and don't decompose as fast and don't steal fertilizer from the plant. They also have, which I think is very important, mycorrhizal bacteria. So there's fungus and bacteria that's good, right? It's like we take a probiotic. Humans can take probiotics to kind of replenish the fauna inside of your intestinal system. Those kinds of, it's kind of the same thing with plants. You know, their roots have a lot of fungus and bacteria that interact with them. They can grow into the roots. They can protect the roots from disease. They can make them healthier. They can help the roots absorb minerals and nutrients better. So there's all this, you know, the theory these days is not to sterilize soil. Soil should have a nice balance of microorganisms in it. And if there's a good balance of microorganisms in a soil, the good ones fight off the bad ones, and you're in a much better situation than if you sterilize soil. It's always the bad ones that kill plants, the ones that come back in first. So it's not recommended usually these days that we sterilize soil or that you get it sterilized. It's having that nice balance. So a lot of more expensive potting soils now also have a long list of bacteria and fungus that are healthy for the plant's roots. So that's another thing you kind of get when you pay for a little more expensive potting soil. So I would spend a little more on potting soil. Where I would save a little money is you don't need cactus mix and orchid mix and African violet mix and palm mix and all these different kinds of potting soils. I would just buy one good potting soil that you like the way it drains. It works really good for the plants you've grown in it. And I would buy a more expensive potting soil. And then I'm going to show you in a little bit here how to make cactus mix out of it. It's a blend of half pumice or perlite and half your potting soil that you use for everything else. So you just got one bag of good potting soil. If you want to make a mix that drains faster or dries out faster for cactus and succulents, you just add this other ingredient at kind of a half and half ratio, and now you got a cactus mix. So I think that's the cheap way to do that. And then it's more versatile. You got this one bag of potting soil that works for all the stuff that needs a lot of water and a lot of nutrition, and then you can blend it with the other stuff to make a lighter mix for plants that like that, and that's usually cactus and succulents. So that's the deal with potting soil. I have some I'm not going to get into it too much, but there is on the handout that you got like some suggestions for how you could mix your own potting mix out of buying the individual ingredients, like the organic matter, different types of organic matter, and then the stuff that causes drainage like sand and perlite and pumice, those things. So it gives like percentages of how to mix together. What I will say about mixing your own potting soil though is drainage is number one. I've mixed many potting soils out of all kinds of different ingredients. Some because people have told me that they're terrific ingredients, and some because they were cheaper than what I'm using, and some have been disasters, and mainly it's drainage that kills you. So what I would do is kind of follow these instructions if you want, and then water it. You fill up an empty pot with it and water it and let it drain, and you water it again and let it drain. You water it again and let it drain. And that's the most important thing. If that water stays in there for more than just a minute or two on the top of the pot, it doesn't drain fast enough, and you need to add a little bit more of the stuff like perlite or pumice or sand that makes it drain. If it drains so fast that you can never build up any water in the top, like if you could put the hose full blast in it and it just boom right through the bottom, it's only going to work for cactus and succulents and not for anything like a tomato or a pepper or the flower beds, all that. So the drainage matters. The worst case is if it does not drain at all. If it takes 5-10 minutes to drain, then it's draining too slow, and it's going to get that stinky, like fermented in the bottom from being too soppy wet all the time, and that's not good for roots. So let's see here, get me back on track. Now I'll go back to this to share screen, because I got some plants that grow better in containers. They just seem to, from experience, I know. And tomatoes and peppers I keep talking about is the first one we'll talk about. Well, cactus and succulents, the first one on your handout, but I've kind of mentioned it over and over. All my pictures were cactus and succulents, more or less. So I will mention that that's what, cactus and succulents. Succulent means the above ground parts are swollen so they can hold water. That's what succulent means. And cactus are a type of succulents. They're all succulents that are like that, like agaves, aloes, anything that has its above ground parts like swollen with water so they can store water and hold it for a long time. And so their life is above ground, which means they don't need a whole lot of root. They're not like plants that hold all their water in the root system underground. they hold all their water above ground in the plant tissue, the leaves, the stems. So there are things that don't need a big pot. So we'll just quickly put in there. That's why they work so well in a pot. And the next one is peppers and tomatoes, exact opposite. They need lots of water and lots of fertilizer and lots of root space. So big pot. And remember, what matters is the size of the pot, which would be big in this case for these type of plants. Like a 15-gallon pot size is perfect for a crop of tomatoes. 1 or 2, 3 big tomato plants in the middle, put the cage in there. Peppers also work really good. Tomatoes and big bell peppers, I think, is kind of a 6-month crop. You might be able to get some in the spring and some in the fall, or the other way around, like some in the fall, some in the spring. But they don't tend, the plants get weaker and weaker as time goes on. And after a year, it seems like I get more disease problems than I do fruit. So tomatoes and big peppers, that's big tomatoes and big peppers seem to be the problem. If you want to grow a plant for years and years, the smaller peppers work great like that. I have a really big chili piquin, little tiny red peppers. I've had that plant for 5 years at least. And it just keeps going and going. So the smaller the peppers are, the hardier they are and the longer lived the plant is. Same with tomatoes. If you want to grow tomatoes and have real good success, grow grape or cherry tomatoes, they're just produce much more. They're hardier to the heat, and you'll get more out of them. But if you like the bigger tomatoes or bigger peppers, then it's a shorter lived plant, but with enough fertilizer, enough water, enough care, you can get those out of it too. And the beauty of having tomatoes and peppers in a pot is they both have a situation where if the nighttime temperatures are above 75 degrees, the flowers start falling off. Tomatoes and peppers both do it. So they make flowers, but the flowers fall off. So people are wondering, like, they're not getting pollinated, or all these different things they think might be the problem, not enough fertilizer or what. But if the nights are hotter than 75 degrees, the flowers are going to fall off of both of them no matter what. But that's okay, because the nights cool off in the fall, and then all through the winter. So it's good to keep a plant around for a couple seasons, waiting for that next time of year when the nights drop under 75 degrees. A good example, we'll start with the summer. So the summer beats both of them up, right? They should be in full sun out in the blasting heat in the summer. So that would be when that pot goes in the shade. You keep it moist. If it looks dry on the surface, you water it again. And then when the nights first start cooling off, it's like middle September, the nights start cooling off. Now that can go out into more and more sun, and the flowers will start sticking. They'll start making baby fruit, and those baby fruit grow into September. Then by the end of September, you got baby fruit. October, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. November, now you got fruit again. So you get one crop there. If you keep it from freezing to death in the winter, which the last 3-4 winters have been very mild and you haven't had to worry about it too much. But if you hear like a freeze warning on the news, for example, then you would move that pot that's mobile, thankfully, up under the porch, up against the house, and that would protect it from the cold. So now you're getting the whole winter time, you can get fruit through the whole winter also, if they don't freeze to death. So the mobility of that pot helps there too. So you're moving it. If it's a really cold night that's going to freeze, you can put it up against the porch, under the shade of the porch, up against the house, under the shade of the porch, or in a garage, for example, something like that. And with a big pot, maybe you move it around with a dolly, because they're good casters. If it's all on cement, you can roll it around with casters a good way. But you want it to be in as much sun as you can for the cold weather, unless it's going to freeze. Put it under cover, pull it back out in the sun. And then when it starts getting, you'll get fruit that way all the way through spring. You get fruit until March, April, maybe even May. The end of my peppers are usually finishing up in June. And then the plant goes back in the shade somewhere, and kind of try to keep it through. And like I say, the bigger peppers, like bell peppers, and the bigger tomatoes, one whole winter like that from fall to spring is usually all they can handle. And I wouldn't put them in the shade. I'd start over in the fall with a better plant. But if you're working with smaller peppers or maybe cherry tomatoes, then they can go year after year. Anyway, that's enough about that. But so your big pot, right? Big pot that doesn't, not terracotta. You want a big pot that holds water, so glazed or plastic. You want to fertilize it regularly, and we'll talk about fertilizer. There's a section coming up about fertilizer. And keep it moist, which means the second you see the surface of the soil dry out, water it again. And that's the way you would do either of these. You can also, this category would have okra through the summer, and that can handle full sun in the summer. Eggplant would do good in a pot like this too, and full sun in the summer. You could do all kinds of like fruiting vegetables like that, you know, in a pot, in a big pot. So we will move on to one of my other favorites is strawberries. So those green strawberries all around that thing, but that's a 5-gallon pot with one big strawberry plant in the middle. And there's got to be 20, 25 fruit all hanging over the edge of that pot. So the problem with strawberries is two things. They don't like our soil here very much at all. They love potting soil. So a good potting soil in a pot that stays moist. So you want a plastic pot or glazed pot about between 1 gallon and 5-gallon size is plenty, you know, because you want the fruit to hang over the edge. That's the beauty, because the next problem with strawberries is when that fruit hits the dirt, it either rots or gets eaten by bugs every time. So you want it to be hanging out in the air, you know, and it's perfect in a round pot like that. 1 gallon for a smaller plant. A big old plant, you can put in a 5-gallon and still have all the fruit like this one hanging over the edge like that. But a wonderful way to grow strawberries here. The problem people have with strawberries here is they plant them in the wrong season. Many times people tell me that I tried strawberries and they died. But if I get into it and start asking them what time of year did you buy them, they usually bought them in the spring, like they would have in a different climate, right? Most of the country, you would buy strawberries in the spring and you'd grow them through the summer, and late summer, you'd have fruit. Here's the exact opposite. You buy them in the fall. You buy them in October if you can, end of September, October, you get strawberry plants, starts, and they grow like crazy through the cool weather. Through the middle of winter, they start to bloom. Spring, March, now they should have flowers all over them, and just keep making fruit until it gets so blazing hot that it starts to stress them out again. So you'd be getting fruit through March, April, May, and in June, usually they start to struggle a little bit. Some people just give up, let them die through the heat because they don't like the heat at all. Or sometimes you can move that pot. Again, it's mobile, so you move it into the shade, crush your fingers, keep it moist, not soppy, and you can get them through the summer sometimes, not always. I've had kind of luck both ways. Some varieties are hardier and some aren't, but some shade would be great. But during the winter when they're growing, you want full sun. So that's the deal with strawberries. I think the biggest problem is when to do them, but it's a winter crop here for sure, and in a pot much better than in the ground. So it's another plant that just loves being grown in a pot. The next one is herbs, and I want to first explain the difference in herbs. I break them into two categories, right? There's annual herbs. That means they grow from a seed very quickly and then bloom, make their own seeds, and die. That's their life cycle, and it's supposed to happen in one summer. Like in the wild, they would sprout in the spring after the snow. They would grow, and then make their own seeds before it got cold again. And then those seeds would be how they survive the winter, and they grow. That's how an annual plant works, right? It's one season is all. Here, most of them grow in the winter. It's the opposite again, like the strawberries. They would sprout them in the fall around September or October, and then they would grow all through the cool weather. And then most of them have trouble growing in the heat here. So it's another one. But those aren't the ones I want to talk about. The annual herbs like that grow from seed and really fast. For examples, it would be cilantro, parsley, basil, dill, stuff like that. Really fast growers. What you're trying to do is cut the leaf while they still have it before they go to seed. And so those ones, they go to seed very quickly in a pot. They dry out too quick. They run out of fertilizer too quick, and both of those things make them blow the seeds. They bolt. They try to make seeds before you want them to. And I don't know if you ever tried to grow cilantro, but if you do anything wrong, whether it be the wrong time of year or let them dry out or let them run out of fertilizer, they go to seed and you get coriander right away, but your cilantro is long gone. So those kind of herbs I do not put in pots. I put them in a really well prepared garden bed, you know, in the ground where there's lots of fertilizer and water and nothing can go wrong. And I grow them in the winter. What the herbs I want to talk about is perennial herbs. So these are the ones that's like a little bush that grows forever. Rosemary, thyme, tarragon, you know, sage, the things like that. They're like bushes, little bushes or ground covers that grow forever. And you trim on them when you want. They never really, if they go to seed, if they make flowers or seeds, they don't die afterwards. So those are the ones you want to put in a pot. And the drying out a little bit, like in this whole terracotta thing that's got going, not only is beautiful and gives that Tuscan feel for a little kitchen garden, but it also helps them dry out a little bit between waterings. And that's good for these kind of perennial herbs, because like a rosemary, for example, or a thyme, if it dries out, not so bad it wilts, but if it dries out a little bit between waterings, it makes the flavor stronger. It makes all the oil stronger on the leaves, and it actually makes for a better herb. So these are not indoor kitchen. I see a lot of people grow them on the kitchen windowsill inside the kitchen. These are for like the porch outside the kitchen. They do need not full sun all day, but they need like really, really bright indirect light like a porch would provide. So east side of the house, outside the door with a little porch cover, something like that. They can handle a little full sun throughout the day, but not indoors. Unfortunately, I see too many people with them indoors and they wonder why they get all long and stretchy and then eventually die. So it's a perfect kitchen garden. And you want to put perennial herbs in like any kind of pot really, but terracotta works terrific for these, and I think it adds a little feel to it. So perennial herbs grow very well in pots too, and convenient, easy to have right up, you know, close by the kitchen. So the next one is these plants that like acidic soil. They hate our soil because it's the pH is too high, it's too salty. This is an Arabian jasmine, which Arabian jasmines grow wonderfully here. Even in full sun, I've seen them grow without any problem at all if they're in a big pot. This is one like the tomato and pepper. You want a big pot that stays moist, a lot of soil, a lot of water, a lot of fertilizer, but they love the potting soil instead of our desert soil. So if you put them in the ground, they usually turn yellow. The leaves turn yellow from the pH being too high. It's very hard to amend the soil to fix that when you could just grow them in a big pot. Other ones in this category are gardenias. Gardenias, again, they don't mind our weather at all. These are plants that love our weather. They just don't like our soil. So it's putting them in a pot is the best way to do it. Gardenias, jasmine, even I've seen people pull off like rhododendrons, things like that, if they got enough shade, stay cool enough. But jasmines and gardenias by far love our environment, love our climate. They just don't like our soil. So there's a couple examples, but if you are trying to grow a plant and it says acid loving or loves acidic soil, try in a pot, not in our native soil, and I bet you anything it would do much better. And most of them are bushes, which means that you don't need a whole lot of, you don't need to be in the ground like a tree would, like a shade tree. Just a big bush. So a big pot, big glazed pot or plastic pot would be perfect with really good potting soil. Those are another type of plant that grow better in a pot. Palms, not all palms. All palms grow well in pots, but some palms get too big too fast, where the only problem there is they would fall over. If there's a point where you can't get a pot big enough and heavy enough to hold up a 40-foot Mexican fan palm. But there's a lot of palms that would do wonderfully in a pot. This is an indoor palm, like a parlor palm. You would buy them in the houseplant section of nursery. And I've actually had that one for a very, very long time. It's maybe 9 feet tall now, but it has grown the whole time indoors, whole time in a pot. One trick with palms in a pot is palms love to have the soil dry out between waterings on the surface, but they love to have their feet in water. So like if you put a saucer underneath the pot, is perfect situation for palms. Like the roots can grow into that water and take it when they need it. but they can stay dry up around the surface of the soil where the trunks come out of the ground. That's the ideal situation for palms to really grow good. And you could also use, if this was outdoors in your front yard, for example, I think it looks very beautiful to have really big, maybe even cement pots or glazed clay pots that are heavy so they don't blow over, and really good potting soil. And there's two types of palms that work great outdoors here that are small enough to keep in a pot, and it's pygmy date palms and Mediterranean fan palms. They're both dwarf palms, which means they get all palms grow bigger and bigger forever. You can't stop them because you can't trim the top off. But some palms grow very, very slowly, like those two, pygmy date palms and Mediterranean fan palms. And then other palms grow like crazy fast, and they would get way too big for a pot in no time. But those type of slower growing palms work really good in pots. Some outdoors, some indoors, depending on the type of palm. And I would try to keep some kind of reservoir of water at the base of them if you can, by the use of a saucer. And the last one that I think is what everyone should have at least a couple around the front yard, entryway, something, is pots with flowers in them, flower pots. And in this case, I would buy really nice pots, save money, whatever, whatever you can afford, I would spend it on the pot, because the plants are cheap and temporary. This is like 6 packs of annual color. These are flowers that you like throw away in 6 months, you buy them in 6 packs, 4-inch, whatever, maybe 1 gallons, and you pack them full. This could have been planted this morning, this pot, and it would be ready for the party tonight. They talk about a spiff up for a party, a quick little, beautification project. And if you have some really nice pots that you like the way they look, they match your decor, whatever, buy some really nice pots, and the pots can last forever. But every 6 months or even more, you rip out the ones that don't look so good, and you buy the ones that are made for the season that you're about to go into. Usually people put summer flowers in right about now. And then at the end of summer, you would rip those out and put winter flowers in around October. So twice a year for sure. But these are the kind of plants that are so cheap that if they stop blooming and you're not liking them anymore, you want to try something different, you rip them out and put another one in. They're annuals. They're not made to live forever anyway. And so you can constantly, people ask all the time in the nursery, what do you have that looks good all year round? That's probably the number one question. What do you have that looks good all year round? Well, perennial plants that live all year round, they all have a good season, a bad season. Some like the winter, some like the summer. None of them bloom like all the time, So if you want beauty all year long, it's switch the plants out and switch them out for the ones that are for the season. So I like to recommend people do this if they just want some color. Like I say, it's a good thing to have at your front door maybe, or on your back porch, or somewhere you're going to be around a lot, and put the money into some pretty pots and really good potting soil, and then switch out the flowers whenever they don't look good. And make sure when you buy these kind of flowers, though, I do see a lot of nurseries, they have, if you go in, so we're in spring now, you should be buying summer flowers that'll last all through the summer. So if you go into a nursery right now, you might find the last of the winter flowers still trying to get sold on the tables, right? So like they rarely throw them away before they have to. So you might go and find a bunch of flowers that are just, they're leftovers from what people should have bought in October for their winter color. So just be careful and either, educate yourself a little bit on which flowers are for what season, or if you go to a nursery with good salespeople, then they should be able to tell you, just ask the question. Because if you don't ask, they might just ring you up for whatever you threw on the table and let you go home with them. But ask the question, are these flowers for the summer or are they for the winter? Because there's totally different flowers for both seasons. So that's the last of the categories that I wanted to talk about that grow much better in a pot than they do in the ground, and kind of uses for pots. Let's see what else I got here. That's it on the PowerPoint. So let me get back to some demonstrations and stuff. I wanted to talk about watering and fertilizer, pests, and then we'll do a little demonstration about transplanting. Let me see here. Get mine. Okay. All right, so let's see here if I can rearrange everything. The watering, fertilizer's next on the, no, watering, so I'm sorry. Watering's next on my handout after the plants that prefer containers. So I'll talk about that now. If you've ever been to like one of these irrigation classes, I actually teach some of those myself, and it's all about deep soaking the plants. You put the water deep, 3 feet deep in the soil where it's safe from evaporation and stays cool. Well, you can't do that in a pot. It's the opposite. Everything I'm going to say about water in a pot is the opposite. It's you can't deep soak a pot, obviously. So it's pretty much when water pours out the bottom, that's as much water as you can put in it. And you can do that 3 or 4 times to make sure the whole pot got really, really, saturated with water, but it's all you can do. And then there's a certain amount of time that water lasts before the plant uses it up, or it needs water again. So you have to water more frequently with pots than you would in the ground, because you can't store water underground like you do with plants. So in the ground, you might be watering once a week, 2 or 3 hours, but once a week. And in a pot, you would be watering in the summertime. I water pots every single day. And it's about, for the plants that aren't succulent or cactus, regular plants, leafy plants, you'd water them almost every day. Whereas cactus and succulents, usually I let them dry out really, really good until the plant almost shows a little bit of shriveling up or a little change of color, yellowy or brown or a little reddish color. Sometimes they do. You don't have to wait that long, but you can. They survive it. And then when you water them, I really soak them good. So a smaller pot, I'll put in a bowl of water. A smaller pot with a succulent in it, I'll put in a bowl of water and let it sit for an hour to really suck it up. But it might be a month before I do that again. Whereas a tomato in a pot, it might take 1 day in the summer and it looks dry on the surface and I water it again. So the frequency depends on what kind of plant you're trying to water, but it's going to be much more frequently than if that plant was in the ground. You always want to make water come out the bottom of the holes. Remember, the pot should have holes in it. I discussed why a little bit, but one thing is salt buildup. So our water, fertilizer has salts in it sometimes, and our water has different salt minerals in it too, and those can build up in the soil. So if you ever see like the rim of the pot has white crunchy salt residue on it, or on the surface of the soil has little white salt residue on it, it's definitely time to leach that out. And all that means is water it and water it and water it and water it until it all dissolves and goes out the bottom. That's a good reason to have holes in the bottom, because you're going to have to do that every once in a while, especially with plants that are not desert plants like the tomato. I keep using that as an example because it's just one of those ones that's not a cactus or succulent, so that's something you could do with leaching. That's called leaching. And you could put houseplants in the bathtub, for example, and you can either leave the hose trickling on them for 15 minutes to where it really just keeps going and going and going, dissolving it out, or you can fill them up and let them drain, and then fill them up, let them drain, fill them up, let them drain 10 times maybe. And every time it dissolves a little more salt and washes it out the bottom. But every time you water, a little bit of water should come out the bottom. That way you know that the whole pot got wet, the whole thing. It should never be a situation of like just enough water where nothing comes out the bottom. And I know a lot of people are tempted to do that, especially with house plants, because there's nowhere for the water to go. If that's the case, get a saucer under it, right? Put a saucer under the bottom so a little bit can come out and stay in that saucer for a day or two. For one, it'll help you stay wet longer if you do that. So either way, if the salt builds up, you should take them outside or in the bathtub and just really, really let some water blow, or fill it up and let it drain, fill it up and let it drain a lot of times. And salt management we talked about, that's listed on kind of how to manage salt and things is on your handout too. The thing that I have not talked about is automation. And I'm going to see if here's some of these props I'm going to have to see the best way for you guys to see. So this is the same black poly tubing that's in the ground in your front yard for your drip system probably. And you can buy rolls of it, and you buy the ends that fit on your hose bib, right? This is the way you can automate your pots on the porch, for example, or if you got a lot of pots that you're having trouble keeping up with watering every day in the summer, this is a way to automate the watering of them. You can use these same materials that are made for drip irrigation. This fitting is made to go on your faucet, and you can just you can just turn it on with the faucet if you want and turn it back off. would be a way to water them all at once. And what you do is, instead of this little skinny tubing having a drip emitter at the end, you get a adjustable emitter with, and that means the top like turns like a dial, and the little sprinkler that comes out of it gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more you open it. So on a little pot, you keep it real small. And on a big pot, you open it up all the way and just try to get it to not over, obviously it's not blowing water over the edge of the pot, but they're very nice that you can adjust the flow because the pots are different shapes and sizes. So the other necessary part is this stake thing that some come with. So you need to buy adjustable emitters with a stake on it, but they fit right on the same 1/4 inch tubing that that the rest of your irrigation system uses. So I won't get into all the details of how to set up the system, but that's the basics of it. You buy these parts, you put them together. Most people could do it. There's no glue involved. There's no, cutting pipe or anything. It's pretty much you just push everything together. You can cut the tubing with pruners and you put it all together. So where it can get a little more complicated, if you wanted to, like last week, go on vacation, for example, where this hooks onto your faucet, you can install one of these. And this is a battery powered timer. It gives you all the options that a timer would, that's attached to your drip system. If you turn the dial, it goes to like the current time. It goes to how often you want it to run. It goes to for how long you want it to run for. It's like a run time, like how many minutes you want it to run. And honestly, pots, it's just until it comes out the bottom a little bit, and it'll come out the bottom of the smaller pots faster. So really, you're just trying to get an average, and I would say it's between 2 and 5 minutes at the most is what it's going to take to water all the pots. But it's going to be very frequently, if they're not succulents. And then start time, like what time of day do you want it to start? So it gives you all those opportunities to program that in. And then, so that whole system that you've built to have an emitter in each pot attaches to this. The other end attaches to your hose bib, and you can automate your porch, for example, or maybe a little greenhouse that you've built, or lath house or something like that. If you have too many pots to hand water with the hose, if you're getting tired of hand water and everything with the hose, that's a way to automate the whole thing. And it's not real expensive. It's not real technical. Like most people, like I say, could handle doing it themselves as a do-it-yourself project. And that's the way that I've automated many of porches. Or you can put all cactus and succulents in, and then you probably don't even need a automatic system because they're not going to need water as often. So that would be it on watering. Fertilizers next, and the most common way people would fertilize pots is with a water soluble fertilizer. General purpose water soluble fertilizer. If you just want it to be easy, and that's Miracle-Gro. Basically, it's the old-fashioned Miracle-Gro. I won't get into all the details of what's in fertilizers, but if it says general purpose, you can use it on potted plants. If you're growing tomatoes, for example, then you might get fruit food, or something that's more specific to what they're trying to do. House plants would be just more general purpose. If all you want them to do is grow, it'd be general purpose fertilizer, all purpose fertilizer, a lot of them say. And then if you do have fruiting plants like tomatoes or peppers, I would buy fertilizer specific for tomatoes or peppers, or fruit, same thing. So the one thing I want to mention right away with fertilizers, too much is not better than not enough, because I've killed many plants by, they grow better with a little more fertilizer, and they grow better with a little more fertilizer, and they grow better with a little more, and then you kill them with 1 more tablespoon. So there's a level that they can handle, and death follows right after that. So you got to be very careful with fertilizer and follow the directions. They all have different, because they're all different strengths, they all have different recommended rates. So a really strong fertilizer is going to be like a 1/2 teaspoon per gallon of water, for example, where a really, really weak fertilizer might be a cup to a gallon. You never know. Just read the ingredients. But as far as putting it in pots, so there's all kinds of fertilizers, right? There's organic fertilizers that you dig into a garden. They're very hard to put in pots because you can't, you might be able to, like in the flower the annual flowers, if you're doing it every 6 months, those kind of fertilizers might work for you. I brought a package of what, this is a pretty good brand. Happy Frog is the brand, and they sell all different ones. This one's just all purpose, but it's all natural. So it's like things that have to decompose in the soil, right? They have to be buried underground and they slowly decompose. It's a great way to fertilize plants in a vegetable garden, in a raised bed. It's just hard to, if you have a plant that's been in the same pot for years, you're not going to dig it up and put this in, and it's hard. Technically it's hard, but in those pots like a tomato or flower bed, the annual flowers, if you're switching those crops out every 6 months or a year, take advantage of that time to add those kind of fertilizers in the soil, mix it up real good. And those are really good fertilizers because they're slow release and they're all natural. They're all natural, which means they don't have a lot of salt buildup. It's just something that goes with chemical fertilizers. You end up getting salts left behind that aren't fertilizers, and that's damaging to the plant sometimes. So natural fertilizers are great, the ones that you have to dig in like that and they have to decompose, but you can pretty much only use them on things that you're renewing every once in a while, like those vegetables and flowers. Other than that, it's liquids, and that's like the Miracle-Gro type. Almost always they come with like a tablespoon green measuring thing. You put one of those in a gallon of water normally, but read the instructions, and then you pour that water on all your plants. It's an easy way to do it. You don't have to think about much more than just doing that. You can put it on little tiny pots, you can put it on big pots. It's just a matter of like watering it with it until it comes out the bottom, and then that's good. That's how much you put on. So that's the easiest way. I have used granular fertilizers, like the third kind of fertilizer. It's little tiny slow release balls, chemical for synthetic fertilizer that comes in slow release pellets. It's usually called tree and shrub food is what you'd buy. There's rarely instructions on how to use it in pots, and it's very easy to put too much. So I wouldn't recommend it as much. I would either go with like a liquid fertilizer that you mix in water. And there's also natural liquid fertilizers. If you want to go organic and you want the ease of just watering it on, look for a organic liquid fertilizer, and that would work too. Liquids are just easy because you can pour them on, and even if the plant has been in the pot so long that you can barely see the soil, you can still water some fertilizer on there. And I do fertilize all plants in pots. As I said before, potting soil also needs fertilizer, no matter how good it is. The cheap stuff needs more, the more expensive stuff needs less, but potting soil needs a little fertilizer to break down. And the plant needs fertilizer because its roots can't go out into the soil far and wide looking for fertilizer. It's all right there in that little pot, like locked up and used up usually, So I do fertilize everything in a pot. Cactus and succulents are maybe yes, maybe no. If you want them to grow, fertilize them. They take advantage of fertilizer by all means, and they'll grow faster with it. And but like I mentioned in the beginning, that little tiny cactus in a little tiny pot that I don't really want to grow too much, there might be cases like that you don't have to fertilize those if you just want the plant to kind of stay. Like it looks good the way it is. You don't want it to get too big for the pot anytime soon. And the beauty of that is some cactus and succulents bloom better without too much fertilizer. So it's another thing to consider. You might get better flowers out of a cactus that you're not really heavily fertilizing to make it grow, because when they're not growing, some varieties make more flowers when they're not wasting all their energy making more stems. So cactus and succulents is a maybe yeah, maybe no. Depends on what you want to do, what you're trying to do. But all the other ones, all the leafy, the strawberries and the jasmines and the tomatoes and the peppers and the herbs and all that stuff, I would fertilize on a regular basis according to the directions on the label and the fertilizer you want to use. So anyway, that's all I got on fertilizer. Pests, it's not really too much that I have on that. If you grow a healthy plant, there's not too many pests that can kill it. I mean, the healthier the plant, the better they can defend themselves, the faster they can grow out of a situation. A lot of the pests we get are not very big of a problem. It's aphids, even white flies usually aren't that big of a problem. There's mealy bugs, there's spider mites, all those things. Almost all of them, if the plant's really, really growing fast and healthy, they'll overcome any damage those bugs can do. Those bugs are also very seasonal. They're usually fair weather bugs, like if it's spring or fall and the weather's perfect, they're there. The first sign of like dry air or heat or cold, they go away. So I don't worry about them too much. What I do as a first response, if I notice any bugs on there, I take the plant outside, I put my hand behind the leaves, and I squirt it off with the hose, like from the bottom up usually, because most bugs hide on the bottom of the leaves. So, you don't want to break branches with the blaster, but so hold your hand behind there and kind of just spray upward on the plant, knock all the bugs off like that out into the yard. And that's most, if you live in an apartment, maybe do it in the shower, but either way, that's about the most I have to do. And then that gives the plant a chance to kind of catch up a little bit, get strong. And, by the time that goes by, the season that the bugs like, that perfect weather usually is gone too. So I don't worry about most bugs, most pest problems. I don't worry about too much. If you have something you just cannot deal with or can't get rid of, like I just said, maybe send me a picture of it and I could help you over email to not waste too much time as far as things that could happen. With bugs and diseases, you always want to go with the most common problem first. You don't want to like WebMD this stuff and like go to some rare disease that only happened once in some other country. It's like there's common problems that happen all the time. Everybody gets the same thing. So put it out there. You can also get on like Facebook groups, like Arizona gardeners or something like that, and get some kind of put it out there and other people will respond. Like, I've had this problem. Just don't go trying to diagnose something and go straight for some rare problem, because usually it's what everybody else is getting at the same time. As far as bugs go, I just hate to see people, because I see them, a lot of people come into the nursery and like they come in with a leaf that's just damaged by the wind, for example, but they think it's a bug and they're looking for like the most toxic chemical to kill any kind of bug it might be. And all I'm asking is you just know what bug it is and what chemical kills it if you're going to spray it, and just know what's going on, and instead of this like sterilize everything out there in hopes that it might be what's wrong with your plant. So just kind of be knowledgeable about what's going on with the plant, keep it as healthy as you can, get some info if you have a problem, get some help with it, and try to use the least toxic solution to that problem is the pest deal. There is the last thing is transplanting. So I'm going to scooch this back a little bit, and I want to first I'm going to talk about the way you transplant plants, right? That means you got a plant that is either too big for the pot it's in, maybe it falls over all the time, it's too heavy, or more importantly, if you have a plant that dries out too fast. Say it's a really root bound jasmine, something leafy, something that needs a lot of water, and it's now too big for its pot, and you water it every day and it still dries out. It's time to put it in a bigger pot, right? That's the main reason you transplant things, is if you can't give it enough water anymore to keep it moist in the summer, it's time to get in a bigger pot. So that's one good reason. And for cactus and succulents, it's more like they got so big they fall over all the time. So either one of those reasons, a good reason to transplant. Remember, you should not do it during the time of year that plant is under stress. So mainly it's the summer. Most plants are not doing real well in the middle of summer. It's not the best time to transplant them, because you're going to do a little more stress by doing it. And so spring, fall, if it's a plant that freezes, it can freeze. I wouldn't probably do it in the middle of winter either. I would wait till spring after the chance of frost. So you're looking for the best time of year, like the healthiest time of year for that plant to transplant it. And what'll happen is the second you put it in the new soil in the new pot, boom, those roots are active and they're growing, and it's going to take advantage of it. If you try to transplant it at its worst time of year, it's going to sit there and have a chance to maybe rot because it's not very active. It might just not do anything for the next 6 months, or it might stress out so bad that it dies during the transplant. So timing is very important with a transplant. We talked about the reasons why you would transplant something. Other than that, I'll get into two scenarios. One is this tomato, my favorite tomato I keep talking about. So it's a 1 gallon tomato, right? It's soon going to be too big for this little 1 gallon pot. And because of that, I'm not going to be able to keep it wet enough in this little tiny pot when it's another foot tall. It's just going to dry out too fast. And even if it dried out for a couple hours, it'll probably drop some flowers. I'll lose that fruit. It'll start losing old leaves. The old leaves will turn yellow and fall off. So before any of that happens, I'm going to put it in a bigger pot. So this is going to be hard to see. See this big old pot? It's almost like a 15-gallon size pot. Would be great for the rest of this tomato's lifespan. And I'm not going to do the demonstration here just for space wise, but I'll explain what I would do. I would fill that 15-gallon pot with really, really good potting soil all the way to the top, except for a little tiny bit of space at the top. And that's what I see a lot of people do wrong, is they put so much soil in the pot that when you water it, the water doesn't make a little puddle of water on top of the surface. It goes right over the edges, right? You can't wet a pot like that. So if the water hits the soil and runs off the edges of the pot because you made it like a dome on top of the pot, you're never going to get that plant wet. So pack it down. You can put not with like a pole and a pounder, but just with your hands, gently with your hands, you pat it down. Maybe you even water it once good to see how far it's going to settle. And it's nice to have about 1 inch of space from the top of that rim to the soil surface. And that inch is what's going to fill up with water and then drain, fill up with water and drain. So you need a little bit of space there between the rim of the pot and the top of the soil surface. That's after the soil is compressed a little bit with your hands and maybe watered once to see where it's going to settle to. It doesn't hurt anything to be 2, 3, 4 inches down, other than it's going to continue going down as time goes by, and you'll end up with a half a pot of soil. It just looks kind of weird, and you'll have trouble keeping it wet. There's less root space in there. So start with about 1 inch of space between the rim and the soil. And that's the case with anything. I'm going to do cactus and succulents in a minute here. Same thing. I won't mention it again. It's like you need a little bit of space for that water to puddle up and drain, You don't ever want to make it like a dome on top, because the water will never penetrate into that soil. This is the first thing I see people do wrong. The next thing is maybe people ask, should I put rocks in the bottom or something like that? I don't ever use anything in the bottom of the pot unless I'm trying to kill space. Sometimes people have these giant cement pots and all they want to do is plant flowers in the top 1 foot. In that case, maybe you throw rocks or something in the bottom of it to kill all that space, and you're only going to put like 1 foot of expensive potting soil where you didn't want to spend the money to fill the whole dang pot with good potting soil. Maybe you'd use some kind of filler like rocks, or I've even seen people for that situation use old water bottles, just something to kill that space. But in general, I don't put a layer of rocks in the bottom of pots. It doesn't help drainage. No matter where the bottom of the soil is, it's going to be a little bit wet there, and all you do by putting gravel on the bottom is raise that up higher and make less space for the roots to grow in. So if the pot has such a big hole in the bottom that the soil comes out like an hourglass, maybe I would put an old piece of broken pottery or something, not to cover that hole, seal it tight, but just to kind of make it where the soil doesn't come out. But even in that case, if you're working with moist soil, if the soil is coming out the bottom of the pot like an hourglass, it's maybe because your soil is too dry, and that's not good for anything. I always work with moist soil when I'm transplanting anything. So put the hose in the bag of potting soil, poke some holes in the bottom, let it drain out, and moisten that soil up again. And I bet you anything, when you throw it in the pot, it doesn't come out the holes in the bottom anymore, even without blocking it with the piece of pottery or whatever. So that's the next thing people ask about, is what I would put in the bottom or anything. It's just good potting soil. And in this case, for the tomato, I'm going to use potting soil right out of the bag, just like the way it comes. It's heavy soil, it drains, but it stays moist for a long time. And that's what this tomato is going to need. And I'd get a potting soil with some fertilizer included, maybe some of those mycorrhizal fungus and bacteria that help the roots, all that. And I would just, you know, fill that pot up with soil, water it, let it settle a little bit, make sure the level's right, and dig a hole in the middle, put this 1 gallon tomato in, and do not break any roots on the tomato. I can maybe show you that on this. You know, you want to turn the pot upside down like this, and then pull this off. And if the roots look like, and if you can see them, if you could see any soil in there, you're still good, and I still wouldn't break any roots. The only time I break roots at all is maybe on an annual plant like flowers, annual flowers or vegetables. If I pulled that out and all you can see is roots, like it's nothing but white, pure roots, maybe I would rip the bottom off, because annual plants can regrow that root really fast. A day or two, it would recover, but it's going to wilt in the meantime, and it's going to struggle a little bit more than it would if you didn't have to break any root. So breaking root is a last resort, only if you think that that thing has been in the pot so long that you can't even see the soil through the roots anymore. Maybe I would rip some root off the bottom and then keep it very, very moist for a couple days, maybe in the shade, so it doesn't stress too hard. But otherwise, if I can, I keep all the roots intact in a plant like this. And then those perennials like jasmine or gardenias, I would definitely not try to break any root at all. On a perennial, a plant that lives forever, if you cut a big old root underground, I mean, that root took years to grow. It's going to take years to grow back. So it's a big stress on a perennial plant to cut roots. So if you don't have to, don't do it. Try to keep everything together as much as you can. That's on leafy, bushy plants, you know. As you'll see in a minute with cactus and succulents is a different deal. But I think that'll be all the things I want to tell you. You can ask questions hopefully here at the end. And then that last thing real quick is this cactus and succulent pot. So I got this pot that I would like to put some cactus and succulent in. It's a tiny little pot, short little pot, but that's good for cactus and succulents. Then you probably won't believe it, but I got all these things to put in there. It's this big old cactus, but cactus and succulents, see, their life is above ground, so the root system is less important. I mean, I still try to break as little as possible, but you can pull them out, and you can like fluff the roots a little bit if you have to, trim them down a little bit if you have to. And this thing I'm going to put like in the back of this pot. I don't know how good you can see with the light. Maybe if I get out of the way of it a little bit. So this one thing about pot design is you can put a pot that looks good from any angle, or you can make a pot that looks good from one direction. So this one's going to be one directional, because I'm going to have like some tall stuff in the back, this cactus in the middle, and then something short in the front. So this one would be like on a windowsill, really bright windowsill, or on the porch where it's up against the wall, and I'm going to look at it from the same direction all the time. If you're making something that goes in the middle of a table where you're always going to see it from any direction, you're going to want to put like the tall thing in the middle and then shorter things around the outside, so it looks good from any direction. But so I'm going to break up these little lady slippers too, and I can get those down to almost hardly anything, because I'm going to squeak them in the back here right behind this cactus. Put those in there. I got another one of those to make some tall stuff. These are going to be the tall things that grow behind the cactus. And remember, the mix is different in this. What I'm going to use to backfill this is cactus mix, and it just means it drains faster is all. Dries out faster, drains faster, and that's a better situation. Some cactus and succulents need it because they would rot in regular potting soil. Some cactus would handle regular potting soil because they don't tend to rot, but either way, it's better to have cactus and succulent mix, you know. So I'm gonna hold these up, put this back where it holds them up a little bit, and I'm gonna put that cactus mix, which I didn't show you how to make, but it's I'll show you the ingredients real quick here after I get these my hands free. So you just put a little soil so all that kind of stays together. Still not packing it in real tight because I'm not done adding stuff, but I'm just putting in enough soil so that everything stands up straight. There we go. And the last thing I'm going to try to put in front here is this little barrel cactus. And same thing, I can break it up. Almost, I'm gonna have to break it down to really squeak it in that little crack there. You know, it works good if your fingers aren't as callous as mine for cactus and succulents. Is some barbecue tongs work great for, you know, kitchen tongs work really good for using on cactus transplanting. So let me see, more or less straighten it all out, and then I would just backfill the cracks, push it in with fingers first, and then maybe like a pencil you can use to really get in the cracks, but you want to tamp it. Remember, even for cactus, I'm working with moist soil, and it packs better, and then I can pack all that in. And to save time, I'm going to leave it like this. The one difference between the tomato and this, can you see that at all? One thing, the difference between the cactus and this, or the tomato and this, is I water the tomato immediately after I plant it, and then I keep it moist, you know, from then on. When the soil surface dries out, I water it again. The day it dries out, I water it again. With cactus and succulents, one thing I do like to do is use moist soil, but I don't water it right away afterward. I wait a day or two. And cactus are very susceptible, especially some cactus, to like root rot. And so as I'm breaking all those roots, there's wounds everywhere, right? All these roots that I broke off, it doesn't hurt the cactus unless an infection were to get in through one of those broken roots. So what I like to do is moist soil, not wet, and pack it all in good and leave it for a day or two, and then water it real good, just to give the chance. What it does is all the roots that I broke, it gives them a chance to kind of callus over a little bit and protect themselves before I put like running water over it, because all those fungus that kill roots, they travel in running water. It has to be very wet, and as the water flows through, their spores can travel and reach those root tips. But that's a little something I like to do for cactus and succulents afterward. But I think that's it. I'm gonna leave it at that. The cactus mix that I made, this white material is like little white rocks. There's two forms of it. Well, one's called perlite, and it's like really, really lightweight, so they call it perlite. The other one is pumice, and they look the same, but pumice is heavy. What I used here is pumice because I like that in a little tiny pot like that, it adds weight to it. And the other thing it does is when you water soil with pumice in it, the pumice doesn't float and go over the edges and go away, where perlite, as light as it is, as nice as it is, it does float away, and then you end up with like less and less soil. So for cactus and succulents, I do like pumice better, but you can use perlite if it's all you can find, or prefer it for some reason. Maybe if it's going in a big pot, you want to be lighter weight to move around, you could use perlite. But either one works about the same. What they do is add drainage. You can use really coarse play sand in the place of either one of those. It stays wet a little longer, but it does add a lot of good drainage, and it's heavy too. So perlite, pumice, or really coarse play sand can be the ingredient, and it's pretty much half and half. So you get a pile of one of those ingredients about the same size as the pile of potting soil out of your good bag of potting soil, and you mix them together 50-50, and that makes a pretty good cactus mix like that. And I think that you want to open up some questions. I don't know if there is any building up or in the chat. That's pretty much all I got to force on you.
That's great. Thank you very much, John. If anybody has any questions, let's go ahead and at least start by putting them in the chat, since we have a pretty large group here this evening, if you're able to.
I have a question.
Sure.
When he talks about a glazed terracotta pot, does he mean glazed inside or outside or both?
The best is both, because it makes the pot last longer. I don't think it affects the growth of the plant very much, but if the clay, well, and I probably did say glazed terracotta, what I meant was glazed clay. So That terracotta with no glaze, the reddish colored, is the dries out faster than any other kind of pot. So that's the one that's much different. If it has glaze on the outside, it'll stay moist for longer. If it has glaze on the inside and the outside, the pot will last longer. So that's pretty much what I've found as far as pot clay with no glaze or glaze on the outside or glaze on the inside. That's what it does differently, in my opinion.
Okay. I have another question. Do I have a time or? We moved here from Seattle, so totally different environment, and I had gone on a trip to Africa. So when I found some Africa tears, I think it's called here, I planted some in a big pot. And now it's just gorgeous. It's huge, And when do I know whether to repot that? Because there's not much soil left in there, but it's huge,
I would let the plant, you said it was beautiful, so it must be doing okay. That's all I worry. The only reason I transplant something is if it gets so big that it blows over, falls over, or it starts looking bad because you can't keep it wet enough, or you can't fertilize it enough, or the soil's so old that it's not really nutritious anymore. But if the plant looks good, then you're good, and it doesn't blow.
Spreading all over the patio, so it's like, do I cut it off or?
Yeah,
it's just spreading all over the patio.
Yeah, you'd trim it and give me some cuttings.
I'm afraid to touch it because it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And one more question. Do I have time to do that? I moved one thing with me when we moved from here to Seattle, and I couldn't bear to leave without it. But it was the big Christmas cactus.
Oh yeah.
And it was huge. And since we moved here, it has not bloomed. And I've tried everything. I've gone on, and it just will not bloom like it did in Seattle. And I don't know quite what to do with that. Is that in your expertise or?
Not really. They're fussy. I don't know what makes them trigger to bloom or not. And it could just be the change, and it's going to take a couple of years to kind of get used to the new daylight hours. It's a big difference in daylight hours from up there to down here. So it might just be getting used to it. I would continue searching, see if you can get somebody who's more knowledgeable on that particular cactus to see what might trigger it to bloom. But I do not.
I wish I had seen this video or this workshop today earlier, because I'd gone to Lowe's and bought a bunch of herbs and some things like that, and so I may have to redo everything. So anyway, I wanted to thank you so much, because I have just been really frustrated, because I miss my hydrangeas.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thank you very, very much. I have totally enjoyed this. So
thank you. And email me any questions that you get later or anything like that.
I'm sure I will. Thank you very much.
Great.
Yep, thank you for attending. Yes, we have a couple questions on the chat for John. Somebody's asking, what about soil gnats?
Oh, good question, because that one is usually a pretty easy fix. So fungus gnats, they're larvae, they're flies, and the larva eats fungus, right? Fungus doesn't grow in dry soil, grows in wet soil all the time. So, and they also can't live in the bottom of the pot. They live in the surface of the pot. So if the surface of the soil dries out between waterings, I mean, like you dig your finger in there and it's dry down to maybe your first knuckle, like an inch or something, and then you water it real good. The house plants I'm talking about. So like you wait on your house plants to water until the surface dries out about an inch or two deep, and then you put them in the sink or whatever you do, and you water them really, really, really good. And then you don't water them again until that surface dries out to about an inch or two deep. It usually breaks the cycle, not immediately, but they can't stop breeding in that environment. The moist soil is too deep to get to, and the surface dries out and kills them all between watering. So usually you can do it that way. The chemical that kills them is the same stuff that kills mosquitoes. And like you can buy mosquito dunks or liquid to put in like your standing water around the yard so you don't get mosquitoes. That same chemical, it's called BT, that would also kill fungus gnats. But I hate to see somebody use it if they could just be drying them out a little easier. Try that first. Try drying them out first. If you really can't get rid of them, you can use that pesticide. But usually that does the trick after a month or two of letting them dry out real good between waterings.
Thank you. That's excellent. Another question. Can I grow Opuntia, Eve's needle, Echinopsis, Spatiana, golden torch cactus in pots?
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's like the size of the cactus determines if it's going to get so big that it falls over, you put it in a bigger pot. Other than that, they all love pots. I mean, even a saguaro loves a pot until it gets so big it falls over. It's like they all love to grow in pots where it dries out better, and they don't need a lot of root space. And any kind of cactus and succulent, for that matter, that I know of, would love to grow in a pot. It's just that some of them get so big on top that the weight alone topples them over. So if you keep putting them in a bigger, heavier pot, you can put any kind in a pot for sure.
Nice. Another question. You mentioned the high alkalinity in our tap water / groundwater. Is distilled or rainwater beneficial for container plants?
Yeah, absolutely. I got gutters on my house. They run into barrels, and all I use that water for, there's a watering can by the barrel, and I dip it in those barrels and we'll go watering all my potted plants on the porch with it, especially my favorite like specimens that I really want to baby. Cactus and succulents, like I say, they handle the alkaline, they handle the salt a little better, but even those grow faster without having to fight the salt. They can fight it, and they usually do okay. But even those would grow better. What really loves that water is like the jasmines and the gardenias and the strawberries. Strawberries would love that water. So all the stuff that does not like the salt, that rainwater just like rips that salt out of the soil. It's absolutely zero salt in rainwater, and so when you put it in that salty soil, it pulls that salt off better than any kind of, I mean, the RO filtered water, like drinking bottled water, would do the same thing, but you don't have to buy it, so either way, like water with zero salt is the best way to get rid of salt, and rainwater is a wonderful free source. Instead of letting it go down the gutter, grab some and use it for sure.
Excellent. Another question you've touched upon a bit is, how do you know if a glazed pot is clay or terracotta?
Oh yeah, I might have messed that up. I think terracotta is a specific kind of clay. I'm not sure. It's like what I call terracotta is the ones that look reddish, like the ones in my photo of all the herb garden. Like those with no glaze on them, they dry out fast, which is good for some things and not for others. It's just something you should know. And if there's any kind of glaze on it, which means it's like smooth, painted or whatever, those are the ones that take longer to dry out. They stay moist longer. So if you know that, you can put the right kind of plant in them. Ones that you want to dry out a little faster can go in that plain clay, red clay, terracotta. And the ones that you want to go longer with staying moist, then it would be good to put them in any kind of pot with a glaze or paint or whatever on the outside. And the glaze on the inside, what I've noticed is it just makes pots last longer, because wherever the clay is exposed to the wet soil, it eventually dissolves away, disintegrates. So if it's completely covered by glaze, they do last a lot longer.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess in answer to that too, it would be fair to say if the pot has a rough texture on the outside, rougher texture compared to some that's a little more smooth, almost painted.
Exactly. Yeah. The rough one's going to dry out quicker is pretty much what you need to know.
Someone's asking about roses.
Roses grow better in potting soil than they do in our soil in the ground, but they do have trouble with heat also. So I've had luck with roses in pots. Big pot, do it like the tomato. Big pot, lots of good potting soil, rich, good quality potting soil, and put them in the shade for the summer. You can put them out in the winter if you want more sun in the winter, but put them in the shade in the summer. Crush your fingers. They don't usually die. I would expect the leaves to burn in the summer. They do that in the ground too. I mean, roses just in general, they struggle through. You got to look at our summer like the dead of winter in a really cold place. It's just they're not their best time of year. So the middle of summer here is like December somewhere else, and they're going to look bad. And then, but come fall, like end of September, when the nights cool off, you trim all the dead off, all the dead leaves and maybe branches, and then all the new shoots come out and they grow like crazy all through the cool weather and make lots of flowers, and you enjoy them all the way until it gets hot again. So if you do want to grow them in the ground, I haven't done it myself. I've grown them in pots with luck. But if you want to grow them in the ground, what I've heard is you amend the soil around them like a garden bed, lots of amendments like compost, things like that. You're trying to make the soil be like forest soil in the end. So you dig a big area out and you amend it with lots of compost. You plant the roses, and a real thick layer of like wood chips on the surface is helpful also. Keeps the soil moist and cool. And as those wood chips decompose, they add more compost to the soil, things like that. So you could grow them in the soil too, but the pot's easy. I mean, a big pretty pot is easy to do and mobile, so you can put them in the shade for the summer.
Excellent. Looks like one other question, just sounds like a clarifying question. So you'd want to put the cacti and succulents in a non-glazed pot.
You can. I mean, what I do, like this pot I just planted up is glazed. I like the way it looks, and what I'll do is just water less often. I mean, the glazed or no glazed is pretty much you if you know what you're up against and what the pot is going to do as far as holding water, then you just adjust, So I'm gonna, if the pot I just potted up was like rough terracotta, I would just water more often. And for cactus and succulent, I mean, that means this one I might, because it's glazed and it's going to hold water a little bit longer, I might water that once a month. And if it was like rough clay and dried out faster, we're talking maybe every 2 weeks. So it's with cactus and succulents, the whole thing is spread so far out. I mean, a lot of the older cactus and succulents I have in pots, they'll go the whole winter without water, and I don't even worry about them. I watch for any kind of like getting a little bit yellow or shriveling up so bad that they look wrinkled up, and then I'll soak them real good and they come back. But it can, like I say, it could be like the whole winter they look terrific, and then it starts getting hot and I soak them once good, and that goes another couple months. So with cactus and succulents, I mean, either way is fine. Mainly I would just the stuff that needs a lot of water, I would be careful you're not putting it in a pot that has porous sides, because they're going to dry out even faster, and drying out is going to be your problem. With cactus and succulents, drying out is not your problem. So you would just adjust when when the cactus looks real dry, you could soak it, but either way would work.
Excellent. That's all the questions that I'm seeing here. If anyone else has any other ones, you can always email me and I can send to John, or you can email Jonathan as well. His information is in the handout that you received. So thank you everyone very much for attending, and we hope to see you at our next class in 2 weeks. It's going to be landscapes for butterflies and wildlife, and if you enjoyed Jonathan's presentation today, he will be presenting as well in a couple weeks. So thank you all very much.
Cool. Thank you, Andrew.